Well, here in southern Alberta, science and agriculture go hand in hand. Today, we're talking with an expert in remote sensing and farming. Now, this goes far beyond your TV remote control and your grandparents' grain farm. Today, we have Dr. Craig Coburn joining us from the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Coburn's work focuses on the aspects of remote sensing science. All of the scientific research helps growers and researchers better understand agricultural crops and other biological systems. Dr. Craig Coburn, thank you so much for joining us today. So great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first off, for those of us who maybe don't know or don't quite understand, start off by explaining exactly what remote sensing is.
Well, remote sensing is what we're doing right now. So we're watching, a television screen with our eyes. So we're viewing this. So if we think about taking that same kind of technology and putting it up into space, then we are using satellites to view the Earth's surface and to get information from the data that we derive.
Wow, that's so cool. And we don't really think about it because we just use it every day, don't we? So is your work and research really a high-tech bird's eye view of a farmer's field? Maybe explain that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Much of the research that we do is charged with answering fundamental questions like things like how are the plants growing? How is that crop developing? What could we expect in terms of yield? Those are sorts of really basic questions that people have asked for a long time. And again, from space, we're now able to collect data that can help us derive that piece of information that's needed in modern agriculture.
So was the study of remote sensing then just kind of a logical step of a transition for you?
It's one of the areas in geography that involves geospatial technology. So you'll notice that on cell phones and other things, you can't 10, 15 years ago, I used to have a hard time telling people what I did. Now I just tell them I make Google Earth work and they understand. But when I was doing my graduate degrees, I used to just tell people I made maps for a living, and that would stop them from imagining all kinds of crazy things that I might do. We're geographers, we make maps. These are the technologies that we now use in order to provide information to help manage and monitor our Earth.
That's so cool. So how long has remote sensing technology been around?
Well, we've had active space programs since 1972. We've been doing. We've always wanted to look at ourselves from above. I mean, it's just a human thing. Whenever you can get on top of a hill and look over where you were, it satisfies a human need to know. So it's an interesting thing. As soon as we were able to get airborne, one of the first things we put in a plane was a camera. We wanted to see it. And before we had planes, we had balloons, and we used to put cameras outside the balloons and take the same photograph that every farm I've ever been at has, usually hanging in the dining room, that shows you your farm. That we've been doing that since the 1850s. So these are the kinds of things that just people find it fascinating. They find these things really interesting. But yeah, we've been at it digitally monitoring Earth since the early 70s.
Okay, awesome. So what are some of the ways that farmers in southern Alberta are using this technology to enhance their farming?
Well, we can use it for really basic things like just trying to tell health and condition is probably the biggest one. So crop health and condition we use really typically, and it's not easily done, but it's reasonably straightforward. Let's put it that way, because some of this gets a little bit high tech, and I don't think people want me to go off and deliver that particular lecture. But we can also do things weed detection. That's a new and upcoming area of interest. There's all sorts of modeling that goes on that requires some kind of geospatial input. So that might be on the government side where they're trying to model the bigger picture of how agriculture is doing across the country. So at every level, right from the producer all the way up to those folks in governments that are trying to organize how the whole system works, we are the people that are providing the data.
Well, that's really fascinating. So what have been some of the limitations in the past with this technology?
I think the number one biggest limitation was we just weren't ready for. We didn't have the computing power. We didn't have the ability to visualize it. We couldn't get it to a producer for free, which we can do now. We just there were a lot of limitations. I mean, technologically, we still suffer that we cannot download all of the data that we can collect from space right now. So we're always pushing the boundary in terms of what we can do. So those were the limitations. Again, 10, 15 years ago, I always tell my students that in 1972, we barely had color television. And we didn't have a video game. My students have a hard time conceptualizing this. And yet we were imaging from space. We were doing the entire globe. So those are, it's difficult for people to sort of capture that. But when you want to bring it right down to people and having these things being utilized in a daily way to manage a modern farm, then it's all about getting data and it's all about making it usable. And so we've had to break down any number of barriers. There's lots of companies, some of them are in Lethbridge, many are in Western Canada generally, that are involved with taking those pieces of data and putting them into digestible bits that farmers are then able to utilize operationally.
Well, that's a really good way to describe it, sort of in a layman's terms. And how do they use it? It's amazing because you're talking about outer space, looking, pinpointing down on a little farmer's crops there. So it really is amazing to me. How is it specifically helping them exactly?
Well, imagine the scenario where you've got, say, the ability to vary the rate of fertilizer application, or you might have some other variable rate technology. One of the things that you need as an input on the farm side is where would we do the application? So if we were going to vary the fertilizer, so if if we can reduce input costs and we can get the same growth response from the plant, then we can go ahead and increase productivity and also put money on the bottom line. So when we do those sorts of things, then again, we've got satellites above, they've got giant telescopes, so they see a long way, and we can get it right down to some pretty small areas. And there's other technologies as well. I mean, we're not, there's unmanned aerial vehicles and other things that can be even closer to the target. But from space itself, then we're able to look down on those small spots on Earth, and we're able to take and collect the information that we get there. So we've got, in essence, what the color of the plant is. Uh, and then we will be able to do those kinds of variable rate pieces. So we give the information that allows the technology to operate.
That is very, very cool. Does this technology have applications beyond farming?
It's an interesting thing. Oftentimes, my students get a little bit excited about it when I list off the number of application areas that are governed by remote sensing. So, even if you just start by turning on the satellite, if you click on the satellite button on Google Maps, that's us. So every time you do any of those things, so it could be natural resource driven. So it could be agriculture, it could be forestry, it could be mining. Those folks are using it. It could be, say, for example, we want to watch urban growth. Where are people on this planet? Yeah, we do that. If you want to know how it is that we have information that lets us understand our impact on our planet generally, deforestation, global warming things. Are the ice caps really disappearing? Well, of course, we watch that every day. These are all climate variables. We're monitoring CO2 in the atmosphere. These are all, there's a list that would go on. We would waste the entire show just covering the list of contributions that remote sensing makes to the monitoring of Earth. But we used to be in the background, right? So we used to be the people that enabled, we did the science and technology that enabled those data pieces to get pushed forward. Now people are starting to ask questions like yourself about, well, what exactly are you doing? I've talked to any number of producers and they say things like, you're spying on me. And I always say, well, yeah, but we have been since I was a child. This isn't new. This is, it's just that we're now making it useful. And you now know that, there's a large remote sensing group at the University of Lethbridge. There's 5 of us that are in the group. That's an unusual collection across Canada. We're one of Canada's largest remote sensing groups. And those are the things that we're interested in. So it's, again, if you name it, we're probably involved. If it involves geographical things across our planet, then we're there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, maybe describe your development of a 6-band system, or better yet, tell us what the bands are, and then maybe about the development that you've made.
Oh, so I do remote sensing fundamental work. So I do remote sensing physics. That's my specialty. So I build things. That's the way I shorten it up. So if scientists can't build their own tools, then they're forced to ask the questions that those who do build the tools ask. I want to ask my own questions. And in order to do that, I have to literally get in and do a little bit of electronics. I do know how to weld, so I build giant robots and things. Um, but I started building camera systems. So these were camera systems that were meant to be inexpensive. I developed, I don't even know how many now. It's quite a few, but if there's an imaging system out there, I've probably tinkered with it in the lab. So and then we would design those things. So the six-band system that I developed, that was a long time ago, and it was developed specifically around questions to deal with the remote sensing of vegetation. So it's vegetation. If you don't have a farm, you don't eat and you die. So it's really important that we get high quality information about about plants generally, but about crops specifically. So in order to do that, I developed a system that had 6 spectral bands. So we're going to place bands in areas where we understand from our biologist colleagues exactly what that plant is doing at that point in terms of how it's reacting to light. So that might be looking at how is it photosynthesizing? Is the chlorophyll active? Those kinds of things. Then we can tell from that, we can go, look, if we see that it's photosynthesizing this much, then we get this is what color it is. But our vision of color extends past what people can see in the visible light range, and we extend off into the infrared. And those are the tricky bits to sense, but we can do that kind of work.
Okay, so Dr. Coburn, this is all like super exciting, but maybe talk about what's the latest and greatest, most groundbreaking stuff that you've done in the past week or month, say.
Well, Jeanette, the most important thing that we've done, and probably for me anyways, in the last few weeks, is the University of Lethbridge with me at the helm was part of the team that was doing the calibration for United States Geological Survey and NASA's latest satellite mission. So Landsat's the most important Earth observation satellite system to date, and we were part of a global team that was out doing the calibration of that sensor.
Okay, so what exactly does that mean? What do you do? What did it do?
Well, the fun part there was when you get a phone call from NASA, you usually pick up, and when they ask if you'd be willing to join the global team to do some calibration for their latest $1 billion satellite effort, you also say yes. And then it was mostly about finding a willing, in this case, a willing rancher down just south of Bow Island who has a grazing lease, and we thank him very much for the opportunity to go out and wander around in this marvelous area of reasonably native prairie. And it's a big, wide area. It's very consistent in terms of its tone. And we just happen to be, so we do research in that area, and we just happen to be in exactly the right spot to help the global calibration effort. So they were putting their current satellite and the next satellite were flying on the same path, which is almost never done. It only was going to happen for a few weeks, and we did happen to get a nice sunny day in southern Alberta to go out and provide data to the United States Geological Survey as well as NASA in order that they can calibrate that sensor.
That's amazing. I'm just curious, when you're researching the land and you contact these ranchers and farmers, what's their reaction?
They oftentimes are confused. They don't realize that we're watching, and it's not for the reasons they think. This is part of a global effort that's been going on since the 70s just to monitor our planet, and I think it's incredibly cool. But we're able to convince them, of course, because a lot of people in the general public don't really understand that this is happening every day, all the time. But we're not up there trying to see if you're doing something nefarious. We're just trying to see what our impact on the world is. So and those are the interesting pieces. But oftentimes they wonder, like, you can see me. I remember when I've contacted several folk, especially in the ranching side, and I'll ask them about their land, and I'll say, well, I need to get over into this area. I need to be in the southwest corner of this particular field at this time. And I see that there's a power line and that you've got a pen over here. And they're like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, look, I'm in Lethbridge, but I'm actually on the government website. I'm able to call it up. Like, I can just zoom in and I can see where that area is. And I can see there's a power line, and I'm going to be at the second power transmission tower. And I need to be in about halfway into your field. Is that okay? And they oftentimes are quite surprised that we can get that kind of detail from space. And I'm always on the other side because for us, those of us that do the research, we always forget that people don't know that we do this. So there's always this very interesting little moment where they realize that we know, and we realize that they don't know, and then we come to a meeting in the middle somewhere, and we have to tell them that this is okay. This is how we monitor the entire planet. You're not special. We're not even interested in you. We're just going to go out, have a look at what we can see.
Amazing. And Dr. Coburn, if people want to learn more about your work or this technology, where can they look?
University of Lethbridge does have a website. I've got a certain amount of stuff that's up there. I am the department chair, so you can always find me. I'm relatively easy to find. A lot of our work, of course, is published, and those things are all sitting in the public domain, so they're available for people to read. If you need the Coles Notes version of it because it's a little long and it gets a bit boring, then you're always welcome to send me an email, and I'll try to respond to as many questions as we would get.
Awesome. Dr. Craig Coburn, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate hearing about all the great research taking place at the University of Lethbridge, as always.
Thank you for the opportunity.